Hey there, good people in crypto land. I'm Matt Lysing, and this is my podcast, Decent People. Welcome back to the conversation. Today, I've got Nick Lambert on the show. Nick is the CEO of Dock, a company that provides decentralized identity solutions. He started out at IBM and moved into the decentralized space in 2011 when he joined the Scottish startup MaidSafe. He was their chief operating officer for 7 years, but now he's the CEO of Dock Labs AG, which is the company behind the Dock Network, which has created Dock Certs, a platform that enables organizations to create and manage decentralized identities and verifiable credentials. This has been a topic that's always been very interesting to me because in a decentralized network, it can be very difficult to have the authority and the authentication to make sure that people are who they say they are, or a document is verifiable, that it is legitimate. So Dock has a lot of tailwinds coming behind it right now. In California, where I live, legislation was passed last year for birth, marriage, and death certificates to be on a blockchain. So those would all need to be verified. There's a similar program under discussion in Utah. The European Union has passed a law that digital wallets must be available to all citizens by 2024. British Columbia up in Canada is also exploring a similar system. So to get all these verified identities and documents onto a blockchain, Dock is working very hard and is part of the Substrate network, which is a modular blockchain. Some of the bigger kind of use cases here are healthcare, supply chain, the metaverse, and in finance. I had a really great conversation with Nick, and I hope you enjoy it. And if you can, please rate our show 5 stars and give us a comment so that other people can find and enjoy the show as well. Thanks again, always, for your support. Hey, Nick, how you doing? Thanks for coming on the show.
I'm great, Matt. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. We were just talking about the weather in different parts of the world, and you're in Scotland, which you've lived in your whole life, I understand?
That's correct. Yeah, and I think British people obsess about the weather because we get so much of it, and we know that whoever we speak to generally has better weather than us, and we like those good news stories. So I probably obsess about it as much as anyone. But yeah, in Scotland all my life, and happy to be here.
What part of Scotland are you in?
So I'm in a small town called Prestwick, which is in the southwest coast. So it's about an hour south of Glasgow, which is kind of Scotland's biggest city, and really overlooking on the beach, looking out towards Ireland.
Oh, wow. I can picture that in my mind. It must be absolutely spectacular.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good.
I think there's a pretty good community of London expats in Los Angeles where I live, because I think they come here and they see the sun and they never want to go back.
Yeah, they wonder what that yellow ball in the sky is, and they just stay there so they can worship it.
Yeah. It's funny. Really great. It's also London, I think, and LA are similar. They're big, but they're spread out as well. So
That's right.
I think there's a physical vibe that both cities share. Yeah, thank you so much for being here, Nick, because I'm really interested in what you guys are doing at Dock, because Dock Labs, which is, you guys are mostly working in document, like how to fraud-proof documents, but this also touches on digital identity, which I find fascinating because it's really rather difficult to verify a digital identity in a decentralized fashion. That's why we have like driver's licenses or a passport. There's a centralized authority that vouches for you. So maybe we could just start there on a high level with what are the challenges with getting a decentralized identity to a point where people accept it and view it as valid.
Yeah. So so Dock is really, I know we'll touch on to that. So it's really not so much about document, it's more about data, preventing data fraud, and really being able to verify a piece of data, and that can be anything. And to your question, Matt, the challenges behind getting somebody to accept it, they're not so much technical like you would believe. So we know how to do the technical stuff. Cryptocurrencies have shown us how to do that. So how do you manage a thing in a decentralized manner in a wallet or in some kind of web application? And we know how to do all that stuff, albeit that we're improving all the time. The difficult stuff is actually the enabling organizations to understand why they should want to start using this technology, why things like centralization is not always a particularly good thing, and also around compliance as well. So quite often you'll find that with lots of technology, we're seeing it a lot with AI right now, the technologists and the developers can make stuff increasingly quickly, but the legal aspects tend to slow things up. And so that's another factor, compliance and the legalities and forming the laws around like technology. So one example of that is within Europe right now, the EU, the European Union, is actually putting into place a law that requires all of the 27 EU member states to actually legally need to provide a decentralized digital wallet for their citizens for the purposes of storing identity documents. And so that stuff is moving quite quickly in parts of the world, and then in other parts, not so much. So really a big part of overcoming some of these adoption barriers, I guess, is what we're talking about. It's mostly regards legal stuff and also education as well, and helping people to understand the benefits of what we can offer.
I had a note to talk to you about that EU program. That's going to be, they have to do that by 2024.
Yeah.
Why are they so far ahead there? What has the industry just been more successful at getting them to understand the advantages, or is it like there's already the EU where if you're a member, you just go seamlessly across borders? But are they trying to streamline that, or where's that coming from?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's down to politics. Like we muse about this a little bit as well, because we speak to people from companies all over the place. And I think you have GDPR in Europe. So there was a kind of early understanding of the desire to protect citizens from corporations. And this is probably following on from that, is giving the individuals the ability to control their own identities, removing that away from corporations and potentially governments as well. And I think of that, a lot of that might stem from the different politics in play within each of the areas. So what you'd find in Europe is there's a lot more socialism in place, so a lot more power to the people type ideas. Whereas in other parts of the world, in parts of the US, I'm certainly not saying all of it, I don't want anyone to start screaming at me that I've mislabeled America or something, but you tend to find a much more maybe kind of conservative stance with regards to their politics, and less desire at scale in the mainstream to start giving the individuals the power that they're getting in Europe. And that's not to say that won't happen, it's just maybe a little bit behind. So I think to answer your question, Matt, it's probably a lot to do with the history and politics of these areas that has driven that behavior.
I wonder too, because once you're in the EU, you've got free reign, right? You can go anywhere. So protecting that outer border I know it's been important for that part of the world. I was once on a bus trip from Ukraine into Prague, and there were like cigarette smugglers on there, and they got busted because you go across that border, and like a pack of cigarettes that you buy for 25 cents in Kiev is now, you can sell for several dollars, a lot more. So I understand that from a first kind of point of view, but is it also, the digital wallet and the digital identity is a lot harder to fake, right? It's not like a passport where it's a physical item.
That's correct. And I think it all comes down to how well it's implemented. So one of the things that digital identity implemented well is you can, once you get stuff like whether it's in a blockchain or otherwise, if you're using like the ability to digitally sign something, and I'll not get into the weeds of cryptography here necessarily, but I think once you can do that makes the digital document much more powerful. You can't really forge a cryptographic signature.
Right, so this is a very standard form of anybody in crypto. It's like you've got a private key and a public key.
Exactly. So your public key infrastructure, just decentralized PKI, exactly the same. So it uses all the same cryptography there. And that's not the hard part. The harder part is with blockchains, for the most part, they're certainly the public ones, Matt, as you will be aware, they're mostly designed to not stop people doing anything they want, so you can go on and you can create Bitcoin addresses and Ethereum addresses and smart contracts, and no one can stop you. And in a lot of these identity systems, that's also the case. So you could go on and create an identity for yourself and pretend you're the government, and then you have this thing that the blockchain can tell who signed it and things. But the reality is, the harder part is making sure that the on-chain identity matches a real-world identity. So you need to have this notion of who's creating these documents, issuing out these credentials. It could be a government-issued identity. It's making sure who is issuing that on behalf of the government, and do they have the right to do that? So that's the thing that's more of a process thing to be put in place. But once that's in place, it's very strong. But you do need that link between real world reputation, real world identity, and what's also on chain, because that's the kind of foundation of all of this.
Does that break it down and take it a little away from being completely decentralized then, in your opinion? Because there does have to be a centralized entity in the process?
Yeah, it could do, but you could have, so this would be something that's called maybe a trust registry. So you could have something that some kind of database that lives somewhere that basically is the law with regards to who is who on the chain. But what you could do is you could decentralize that. So like you have blockchains are basically ledgers. And that trust registry could be run in a decentralized way. So you could have multiple parties that are responsible for issuing the credentials, and where that trust registry is hosted could be decentralized as well. So it is a centralizing aspect, that's definitely correct to say, but you could do it in a decentralized way as well.
Okay. Yeah, I was interested to see also that California, where I live, they passed legislation last year that soon all birth, marriage, and death certificates are going to be issued digitally and verified on blockchain.
Yeah.
Utah has a similar, I think Utah's got like a kind of a program where they're working on something similar. Are you going after that kind of project? Is that what Dock is doing? Or do you know, is like California thinking they're going to use Ethereum, or what's the thinking there?
Yeah, I'm not sure. We tend to not focus too much on government type projects. Are quite slow moving, as you would expect, and a little bit unpredictable. While we have looked at a few, we don't really focus on them too heavily, because we're wanting to see stuff out in the wild, get it adopted, improve the product based on feedback. So we don't focus too much on government stuff. But I know that, there will obviously be people looking in those departments. I know that the Department of Homeland Security is very switched on to decentralized identity, looking at how it can be used for things like import, export, social security right across the US, and quite a few other use cases. So I think there's definitely...
Isn't like social security fraud? I know you don't live in the US. I think that's huge. I mean,
exactly.
That's a huge...
Yeah, and so they've done a great job of engaging with all the really clued up, companies that are working in the space, and they've run a number of kind of public tenders, and there's several projects up and running. So I think they're going really well with that. I think the US is typically a little bit fragmented, because obviously having all the different states and each of them having a lot of power. So it does tend to get a little fragmented. I think another thing that California is doing particularly well is moving towards this kind of mobile driver's license. Is something that people at ANVA and stuff are starting to look at and seeing how they can apply technology to that use case as well. But yeah, as you would expect, being in the heart of the technology world, California is probably pretty well ahead on this stuff.
Okay, so let's go back a little bit. Like Nick Lambert, as an 8-year-old boy, he dreamed of being and talking about digital wallets on podcasts and how to decentralize identity, or
yeah, he probably dreamed about wanting to be a motorcycle cop or something daft like that, or probably being a professional soccer player. Okay. Neither of which I got particularly close to. I ended up in technology, which is something that I always enjoyed. And
did you grow up near where you live now in Scotland?
Not far away, like maybe 60 miles. But yeah, I went to university in Glasgow, and my first job was at IBM. So IBM was a very big presence in the west coast of Scotland. So I worked for them for quite a few years, and that probably gave me a really good grounding for working in really dynamic environments in and around technology, and really just seemed to flow from there.
Okay. What soccer team did you support?
Well, I don't really follow soccer too much now. Like I got a pretty bad injury when I was younger, and it just kind of sickened me. But I did support a team called Aberdeen, which is on the other side of Scotland. They won the European Cup Winners' Cup back in, I think it was 1986. And
I've heard
as a young kid then, so that was really what got me going. But I do still follow Scotland, but I don't really follow a team as much.
Okay, fair enough. Totally random question, but the one band I know out of Glasgow is called Glass Vegas. Do you know that band?
Yeah, they've not been around for a while. They were a fusion.
Did they break up?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Scotland's had a lot of good bands. Like the big ones now would be like the Snuts. They're really good, really like fresh sounding. Yeah, Glasgow's got a really vibrant music scene. Yeah. Churches and things like that is a bit kind of lighter, but yeah, Glasgow's got a few kind of great bands that have come out of it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So what was it about technology? What was it about IBM that sort of opened your eyes? Or was it just, it was the opportunity because they were there? Or was there something like you think deeper that appealed to you as a person and like your own creativity?
I think it's exciting. I think it's when you're part of a really big organization and you start to think, you kind of see all the possibilities are endless. Like it's very easy in certain parts of the world that's where you get stuck. And I was always determined that like I wouldn't have a dead end job where I felt like I couldn't go anywhere with it. Like that was what I was going to do. And so IBM always felt like there were loads of opportunities, and there were like people would go away and work in the US or work in different parts of the world, work in Asia and things like that on projects. And it just offered those opportunities that you wouldn't get with any kind of small local firm. So it just was exciting. And the money involved as well. Like for some reason, like even I was a buyer, so like buying lots of like microchips and memory and stuff. Although it was just numbers on the screen, the amount of money you were spending was exciting as well. But so that kind of that whole experience is quite intoxicating. And then after doing that, it's kind of difficult to go back to a smaller business or one that's where this different changing environment that the technology can provide. It'd be difficult going back to an environment where that didn't exist.
Yeah, talking about a digital wallet, I'd like to have $25 million in an IBM digital wallet. That'd be nice.
As long as they don't hold your keys though, right? Yeah, absolutely.
So what era in computing are we at when you're at IBM? Is the internet out and
It is,
around?
but yeah, we're just about to hit a boom. So I pretty much graduated I'll show my age now, back in 99. And so then went into IBM after that. So like right around the dot-com boom. And I don't know if many of your listeners remember, like the big project I was working on when I got on there that was everyone's panicking about was Y2K. And the notion that the timers on your computers, like no one really knew what was going to happen, and everyone thought the world might fall apart because all the clocks in our computers were all going to go to zero or something. So that was a weird thing if you think about it now. But at the time, I spent inordinate amounts of time like looking at that and working on projects. It almost feels like that didn't happen.
I lived through that. I remember my wife and I and my friends were all like in the central coast of California in this kind of remote place, just in case everything went down.
Yeah, it's so weird, isn't it?
Yeah, so weird.
I don't think anyone was really affected in the end.
No, I don't think it did anything at all. Okay, and so you're the internet is like getting established and about to take off with the .com stuff. So and then where did you go from IBM? What were the lessons you took from that? And like, where did you think like your career was headed after that?
Yeah, weirdly, I decided at that point I didn't really ever want to work for a really big company again. Like, as much as I've just said how that kind of big environment was opportunity, there was a lot of opportunities and it was exciting. Big companies have all the politics associated with it, and it felt to me, at least, you spent as much time trying to cover your backside with things as you did, just in case like one of your colleagues tried to shoot you down. And that sounds like a kind of paranoid angle to have, but it did feel like there was quite a few people trying to climb the greasy pole, as it were, and certainly some people you certainly saw them go after colleagues. So that part for me was the kind of downside of a big company, the politics involved. And so I kind of decided at that point, rather than be a very small cog in a big machine, I liked the technology environment and really wanted to be a kind of bigger cog in a smaller machine. And so at that point, it was great to be able to move into smaller companies. Yeah,
it's amazing when you're in a big company. I was at Bloomberg for a long time, and certain people, and they fail upwards, I guess is the way I think of it. And you just look at them and you're like, how the fuck do you keep doing that?
And the worst thing we always say is the worst thing you can be at your job in a big company is quiet and competent, because you'll just stay there forever. You either are, like you say, like terrible, and every manager pushes them on to the next person, and you end up moving around that way. But yeah, being competent is not always the best thing.
No, because you're going to get taken advantage of, most likely.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hear that. So what did you do? What was the small company you went to?
I actually went and worked my in-laws' company. So they had a manufacturing business, which wasn't technology led on the computer chip and the hardware side, but like technology in terms of the materials that they were building with. So they were both ex-Olympic kayakers, believe it or not, in Scotland. And they went to, I think, 2 Olympic Games, my father-in-law and one for my mother-in-law. And they basically had this business built up, and they were wanting to step back a little bit, and my wife was already working there, or she was my girlfriend at the time, and I went just to work there to tide them over for a year or two, and I ended up staying there for kind of 3 or 4 years, and then that was my first mergers and acquisition experience. Like that business was sold to SC Johnson, a US company that's probably most famous for making Pledge, the furniture polish. But they had a big, massive outdoor arm. So that was a great experience because it was a total change in what we did as a company, but also getting up close to what due diligence really looks like with a large company and going through that negotiation phase was an excellent experience.
Yeah, that's cool. And then you came back to technology with MaidSafe when you went there.
Yeah,
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Of course. So MaidSafe is basically like, for those that remember and still use, like BitTorrent before it was kind of taken over by Tron, but it was BitTorrent, but for private data. So BitTorrent was a way for public data to be held for a period of time by individuals, but running computers at home. And so basically it would be this distributed storage network for public data. Didn't have any incentivization mechanisms and stuff built in, but it just worked. There were some centralizing features with it, but MaidSafe was basically that, but on steroids. So our idea was, or the founder's idea, I can't claim this one actually at all, but David Irvin, the CEO's idea was that you remove, it's very similar to the Web3 stories that we hear today, removing the centralizing and commercial part of web services. So today we would all store our data, whether it's music or files or whatever, in centralized places. But how about if we all put a bit of software in our machines at home and all contributed to this global network? So this software would connect together all our computers at home to create this global data storage network where data was always encrypted. And the data would move around this network, and it would be incentivized for people to run those devices. And so that's basically what MaidSafe was. It was the earliest decentralized storage network, probably after something like BitTorrent. So that was an amazing grounding for what I'm doing now.
That strikes me as similar to like IPFS. Is that similar?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like IPFS, but IPFS was never, I think they're trying to put some security stuff in there now, but it was again for public data. So it was never encrypted. It wasn't really ever intended for, or wasn't originally designed by, I think it was Juan Bennett, or if I don't know if I said his name correctly, but he would design that for public data to be available, almost like a
public record.
Exactly. Yeah. And so MaidSafe was trying to do that stuff, but also for your private data as well. So you could hold your private data out on this network. So that was the idea. So it was very complex but very interesting. And like I say, a great grounding for getting into the Web3 space.
And you were there right around the time Bitcoin became popular. When did that come across your radar, or crypto in general?
For me, it was some of the guys. I worked from MaidSafe from late 2011. And even at that point, some of the engineers in there were mining Bitcoin at that time. But I never really took much notice. There was probably a lot of things that they were interested in that I didn't think was that interesting. And where it really struck home for me was in late 2013. Like I said, we had this network, but we're trying to figure out what is going to incentivize people to turn their computers on at home, burn power, use their internet connections and all that stuff. There must be some incentive for them doing that. And how would we facilitate that happening? And so looking around, you can see actually, wait a minute, Bitcoin does that. So you have this decentralized network. Miners in this case run large-scale computers effectively and servers to provide hashing power to this network, and they're paid out in this token, Bitcoin. So that's an interesting thing. So at that point, you started to look at copying that concept to bring that into MaidSafe, and that's what we did. So we started to build in this notion of basically a cryptocurrency or a cryptographic token built into the network that would be paid to users as they store other people's bits of data on their machine.
Okay, cool. Was it blockchain based, or were you guys just having the servers were centralized?
It wasn't blockchain based, but it was probably more akin to like this will maybe do a disservice, but almost like a IOTA type DAG network. It would be more like that rather than a chain. What the tokens would have it would be like digital cash. So it would know who the previous owner of the token was, and it would know who it was sent to, but it would have no recollection beyond that. So so it was interesting. It was definitely quite a different take on that, because I think the founders saw like the scaling issues that can exist with blockchains.
Yeah. So was there something during that period, a project or any kind of development that really caught your eye in the Web3 space and crypto in general?
We actually did. I mean, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but we actually did I think it was the world's second ever ICO back in 2014 in April. And right along after us, there was this project called Ethereum that everyone was talking about. And we kind of remember speaking to, the first conference I went to, I remember, was in Texas. It was in Austin. It was actually where they have the Circuit of the Americas, I think, where they sometimes have the F1. And I remember back in those days, like Vitalik Buterin was obviously kind of starting to become known, but like no one was really a big star in those days. And you go into his conference and just happily wander in and see people like that speaking. So Ethereum was certainly one that at the time you could really see that was getting traction. So that was certainly one of the projects that stood out. And there's been probably quite a few since then, but I've probably forgotten them. So it doesn't maybe mean that they made it, but Ethereum was obviously one that stood out for us.
And then you said that MaidSafe was one of the first, like the second ICO?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So that was back, I think Mastercoin was the first. And then the guys that were behind that project helped us work on that project as well. Yeah. And with mixed results, I'd say like we made, I think at that point, I can't remember what the only fastest ever crowdfunding before that, but I think we made about $6 million in 5 hours, which in today's like ICO like world, that's absolutely nothing at all. But at that time, I think the Pebble Watch or something like that was the only thing that had gone as fast as that. And it was just a kind of really interesting way to not only raise finance, which you were trying to do as a company, but also to have a group or a community of people that were bought into making you succeed. So it's a really effective mechanism for kind of growing a community as well. I think that's often forgotten about. But
and I say this all the time, that basically reimagined one of the most important functions of finance, which is raising capital, right? You have to go to a bank, or you have to go to a venture capital firm, or you have to find the money somewhere. And here, you can go out to people who don't know you and strangers, but are people who maybe want to support your project and raise money directly from them. So it's one of the
powerful. Yeah, but it's definitely not always, is like history has shown us that you do need to have some kind of way of protecting people as well, because, and that could be an unpopular comment, but we've seen so many projects just disappear, and you do get people that have raised ungodly sums of money. Like I think you mentioned like IPFS and Filecoin, like that was an example of a project that raised $250 million and had not built much. That's pretty ludicrous as well. So I think it's definitely, but some projects would only get funded that way. There are certain things that VCs, venture capitalists, are very focused on metrics and numbers, and they all have their formulas about what, and their sweet spots about what they're looking for. And simply, if that was your only fundraising mechanism, a lot of great ideas wouldn't ever see the light of day. So I think it can be a very powerful thing, but it's also, there's been a lot of frauds over the years as well. So I think it's definitely a good thing, but you need to be careful as well if you're going to put money into these things. Do you know who the people are? Do you trust them, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. Speaking of fraud and Dock Labs, did you have a personal experience with document fraud, or was that just the next leap in your career where you wanted to go dive a bit more directly into Web3 and blockchain world?
Yeah, for me, it was more, the fraud angle was obviously there, but I'd never, and touch wood, I haven't been like heavily defrauded yet. But I think for me, it was more about the aspects of enabling people to control things for themselves. So again, what MaidSafe or what Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies had shown is that it's very powerful to be your own bank at times. It's also worrying, because if you lose your access, you've lost everything. But at the same time, it's very empowering to know that you can transfer value to someone almost instantly for almost no cost. And it's empowering to have control over something as opposed to a company having control over you. And I think that's really what drew me to the concept of Dock, was what's bigger than identity? What bigger thing can you control online? There's really nothing bigger than that. So if you can control your own identity, you can really control your own destiny at that point. So that was really the big thing. And then once you have that identity layer in place, then what do you do? So you can start to then make claims about things, and these claims can be proven instantly. And these claims are things like basically verifiable credentials. So it's the right to practice medicine, I've got a degree from Harvard, I've got some kind of identity document from somewhere. So those are
let's jump into that a little bit. How does what Dock do differ from somebody just claiming that today on a resume? Like where's the difference in that it makes it basically, or it makes it almost impossible to say something that's not true. Like, can you just walk me through how that works?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, you could be claiming anything, whether it's on LinkedIn or in a CV. And so you go for a job, you claim you've got an economics degree from, I'll use Harvard. I don't even know if they teach economics, but we'll use that as an example. Today, if I then want to verify that as an employer, I would need to then go to the university and probably spend a few days, because it'll take them a while to which department do I speak to. Once I find out, are they going to give me the information that I need? And typically that process takes about 3 days. It can cost up to $100 to go through that process. But now if that same credential existed as a verifiable credential, what that means is then the employer in this case would make a request to the holder. That would be the person applying for a job. And they would ask them for that degree certificate in kind of digital form. And they would literally send this request to them digitally. And that would be received potentially, as Dock would have it, in their wallet. They would decide, as a wallet holder, you would decide, do I want to share this degree? Do I know who this company is? And do I want to share this credential with them? I can then select yes and then send that to them. And that sends them what we call a verifiable presentation, Matt. And so that presentation is basically a credential that has been signed by the university, Harvard in this case. It's also been signed by the holder of the credential, and they're sending that in direct response to the request for that credential. So when you have all these digital signatures and a direct response to that request all in place, you can be very sure like the authenticity and the legitimacy of that document. And so really what this all hinges upon is, if Harvard University have said that Joe Bloggs has a degree in economics, it all hinges on how much do I trust that institution. If Harvard's got an amazing reputation, so the likelihood is, yes, I do trust that institution, then everything else can be trusted. And so that can be verified instantly, that credential. Again, literally, you can drop it into one of our applications and it'll literally verify it for you right in front of your face, and you can trust that document at that point.
So days of time saved. Are you getting institutions like Harvard and other respected places to come on board with this?
Personally, Dock is not. We have, like, Blockchain at Berkeley was an institution that we spoke to. What we have found in our experience, I think I've heard others in the space, other kind of CEOs and founders have talked to, the bricks and mortar universities are very slow. They are quite risk averse and the new technology, obviously at different levels, but they tend to be quite slow moving. And so we've not found a great uptick, but I think the potential is massive for that market in the longer term. But what we found is smaller independent education and also training companies have been much more. So what we've really found is a little pocket of companies that do things like, and you wouldn't even think these exist, but imagine the guy that goes up the telephone mast, like these big telecoms towers on all these ropes, and has to go and fix these towers. They're all like on YouTube and stuff. If you've ever got time to look at them, they're pretty scary. But the people that
sounds like a good YouTube rabbit hole.
Yeah. But it looks terrifying to me. But these people are all trained with these to work at height. And so we found that these companies, and obviously, if you were claiming to have that skill and then didn't have it, imagine the consequences, right? So not only could you die, but also there's a liability for the company. So there's quite a big market for companies that train these individuals to work at height or work in confined spaces or work on like construction sites and high skilled jobs. And so they need to train people, but they also need to certify them. And they need to be able to prove when they come onto sites that they actually have this training, that they're compliant, that they know what they're doing. And as an organization, that you're not going to get sued for allowing someone to come on a site that's not compliant. So that's another really great use case for verifiable credentials.
Yeah, that's interesting, because there you might be hoping for a critical mass, right, of all these different things or different organizations that need to attest to something. And then Harvard or other like maybe major hospitals and things will see, oh, there's quite a lot of people doing this already. I think it's not as risky as we thought, and we'll jump on board.
That's right. And even like in the US, there's a company we're working with called Burst IQ in Colorado. And a big focus for them is training nurses and working with like large agencies that supply nurses to hospitals. But there's a big problem in the US, like not only are nurses leaving the sector in their droves, but also what's happening is if they try and shift their location to work somewhere else, maybe in a different state or even a different hospital, that process can take up to 6 months, because The other hospital has to be 100% sure to verify that that nurse or that doctor is sufficiently and adequately trained to work with them. And so that process today is a bunch of paperwork and all this verification stuff that needs to go on that, like I say, is all done remotely and takes many months. But imagine working in a world where, and this is what we're working on with this company, with Burst IQ, is where that medical professional turns up with a mobile phone and on it they have their digital wallet. And inside their wallet is a bunch of credentials issued by some licensing board in America that tells the hospital that they're qualified to work. And imagine that within a few minutes, they could actually start working in a different location. And then you think about how powerful that could be, but then imagine that in places that really need it, like disaster zones, where like medical attention is really in short supply and you would want people to be helping out, but they can't because they're not being approved to help.
Yeah, there's a backlog, right?
Exactly. That's where it becomes like really powerful. And even just beyond money and making money as a business, just in terms of like human good, that's such a powerful thing to be able to do. Yeah, we've
huge gain in efficiency.
Yeah.
And please tell me you're doing something on title insurance on this for anyone who's bought a house. There's always a title search, which is absolutely ridiculous, and you have to pay a couple $100s for somebody to look up that nobody's making a claim on the title that you're trying to buy. And it's just, my God, please put that shit on a blockchain and get those people out of a job.
Yeah, that and like all the land registry stuff as well. Like that's a great one in the developed world, and all the background check companies, there's quite a few that we're speaking to now about that. So like that definitely makes that a very strong use case. But even if you look to places that don't have a lot of infrastructure in place, in parts of Africa where there's large land masses that are owned by someone, but basically you can't live there anymore, refugees, and they move away from the land. And then when they move back, there's no title deeds, nobody knows who owns what. But imagine you could put that land registry stuff on a blockchain as well. So like you say, that's a really great use case.
Yeah. And speaking of blockchain, you guys are working on Substrate.
Yes.
And it sounds like you made the decision not to use Ethereum because it can be slow and costly. Yeah. Is that sort of what, and Substrate is a modular blockchain, right? So that means it can have many different, or maybe you could explain it, like
of course.
And how that helps you guys at Dock achieve what you're trying to do.
Happy to. So we actually started on Ethereum. So we actually had, Ethereum we were working on, and that was the basis for what we were building. And then during that process, NFTs in the form of CryptoKitties came along and really started to congest the chain with that activity. And so it became difficult in terms of how long transactions would take to confirm. And also,
I think it was a catastrophe.
Yeah, I see you've done that. You're wasted on this show. But yeah, exactly. You had stuff like that. And then you had the cost being very volatile. And if you're a business, you need to know how quickly something is or isn't going to happen, and you need to know what the cost is going to be. And so for us, that risk was too great. It's like you can't really base a business on that. And there's been certain strides since then with regards to making like layer 2s and stuff that make those main chains a little bit more immune from that type of stuff. But at that point, we decided we needed our own bespoke blockchain for basically just identity and just credentials. And so we picked up Substrate, which is basically a framework by Parity, which is the guys behind Polkadot, and the Web3 Foundation. And we basically built our own chain.
Yeah, that's Gavin Wood. He was a co-founder of Ethereum. Basically wrote Ethereum after Vitalik kind of gave him the architecture. He took it from there.
That's right.
Amazing, brilliant guy.
Definitely. So then you have this chain, and so we are not, I think what you're also talking about is we are basically a solo chain. So we are not like, so one of the things that you can do with Polkadot, and they have, I think there's the Kasama network, and there's Polkadot network as well. So you can actually have this notion of parachains as well. So you can actually be a chain within many other chains. And then with the idea being that these multiple chains provide you greater security, but maybe you just have one set of validators confirming the transactions and producing those blocks across those chains. And so that was, again, a little bit before our time. And obviously there were auctions and things involved in that. So we just basically built our own. And that's been started as a proof of authority chain. And then within about, 3 months, we started a proof of stake network. And that's been running for, I would say, over 2 years now.
Okay. Wow, really cool. And then you also have a token, the Dock token, that's inherent into the ecosystem. So, which is needed to process operations on your network. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how you went about it, and whether there are any lingering concerns about whether this is a security in the current regulatory environment, or I guess whether you're offering it in the United States, first of all?
Yeah. So we would definitely see it as a utility token, but we're not big enough to appear in anyone's. Certainly, we weren't named as part of, I think, the SEC's recent kind of thoughts about what securities are and what they aren't. And so, yeah, the US is not an area that we focus on. We're not listed on any kind of US exchanges. And so the company itself is now based in Switzerland, Dock Labs. But for us, that kind of feels a little bit like, for us, it's a bit of a distraction. So for us, there's a very clear utility for Dock on the network. And so that's the very definition of utility. And so, like you said, if you want to do something on the Dock network, you must have tokens in a wallet somewhere in order to do those operations. If you want to change how the network is run, there's a decentralized governance system that really has the token in a place where anyone can raise a proposal and basically everyone can vote on it again using these tokens. And then it's a reward mechanism as well for not only the validators for providing their resources, but also for stakers who are basically locking up tokens on the network to help secure it. So for us, it's very much a utility. And yeah, the challenges in America are anyone's guess as to how that's going to fall, but it looks like it's going to rage on for a while. So for us, we just keep our heads down and know that the token has a really key aspect to the network and is essential to its running.
And so when you're talking about like that use case with a nurse or a doctor that wants to change locations in the United States from state to state, how are you working with them when the Dock token, you're not offering it in the United States? How does that, it must be frustrating.
Really good question, Matt. We work with companies. And so what we would do is we've built a couple of different things, but one of those, the key things that we found when we started trying to commercialize Dock is even technical companies, they don't want to they want to do as little as possible, which is probably quite obvious when you think about it. But so we basically went and built a REST API, which is a thing that most developers would understand to how to build an application. So we provide these tools with Dock, and they can go and build this application with it that enables these credentials to be issued to nurses, and then provide a wallet that enables the nurses to store and manage these credentials in this example. And so that's really, and we, in that process of building that API, we abstract away all the token stuff. And so we basically, behind the scenes, have a wallet for all the API customers that we keep stocked up. And all the customers understand is, I'm paying a monthly subscription in fiat to Dock. And behind the scenes, we're managing keys, we're managing tokens for them, managing the volatility of the token price and all of that stuff. So really, companies working with us from any part of the world, in many cases, they don't even know there's a token existing on the network. They know there's this decentralized.
Taking care of that for them behind the scenes.
It's all done for them. If you want to get your hands dirty with that type of stuff, and we've really not found many that do or any that do, that is available to you as an option. But for the most part, it's very much kind of kept away. And then for the wallets, like, people can just go and download a wallet from the App Store. And depending on the type of identity they select, again, they don't need to pay anything for it. It's there for them. They don't need to worry about tokens so much. So all of that is really removed from them. But it's still a great way to try and harness the power of decentralized technology and the kind of self-sovereignty it provides. But yeah, people just don't want complexity in their lives, and they don't want to understand what tokens are and what blockchains are. And we just keep that away from them.
Okay, got it. So we've been talking about like credentials and whether I actually attended Harvard University, which I did not. And those are all very interesting. And it's very clear to me how you guys are going about making sure that those things are verified. But back to where we started this conversation, like, identity is a much larger thing. Is this the road to identity? I want to prove that I'm Matt Leising in the web or on the Web3 or a metaverse. Are these attestations and like the things we've been talking about with documentation, is that identity, or is there another part of this that still needs to come to not just prove that I went to a certain school or I have a certain qualification, but that I am me? Do you know what I mean?
I do.
I do. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's a means to get there. And so where's the link? I guess what this boils down to, Matt, is probably where is the link between Matt, the person, and your on-chain identity or identities? The answer to that could be, and who stores that information as well is interesting. Because at the moment, a lot of the biometrics that are used on devices are not really a great way to identify you, because all they're able to say is this was the last set of retina scans or fingerprints that were able to unlock this phone. So you present them the same information, you can unlock your phone, but it doesn't have any notion of who you are. And yeah, that's certainly something that this technology can deliver. We're talking the other day about actually being able to put biometrics inside credentials. And so imagine you actually put your biometrics inside credentials and then use those to identify yourself. But you would have to have some location where your biometrics are stored so that the credentials that exist are your biometrics.
Can you store this stuff on chain with Substrate? Does it have enough capacity, or is that something that has to be off chain?
Credentials don't really go on chain is the great thing. They would just live in the end user's device. So really all that goes on chain in many cases, or what we'd advocate for, is who is the issuer of the credential. So if it was like a government-backed identity, the issuer, the public identity of the issuer, that would go on chain, and nothing else need go on chain. It would all go into your own device. So if you're then presenting a credential in some way, you're only giving them what is on your device. You're not necessarily wanting to put any of this information on chain, because of course most blockchains are using cryptography, but they're not encrypted. So that data is in plain text. So you definitely wouldn't want to be putting really any of these credentials on chain, but you certainly would want to store it in the device and back it up.
Yeah, if somebody could identify me with that particular address, then they'd know all my, then they'd have access, to all my documentation and whatnot.
And I think what we talk about, Matt, with identity as well is, I think sometimes people think all it is like a driver's license, a passport, and that really comprises your identity. But actually, when you think about identifiers from the context of how you access websites, all of that stuff are identity of a sort as well. So if I want to access Google give me a kind of username and a password, or an email and a password, and they're giving me an identifier that I use to access that service, which is centralized. But what we would like to move to, and is starting to happen, and we have a product that does this, is where you could actually have, you're the one that's creating the credential to access the site, and then you're deciding that you no longer want to access that site. You take that with you. No one's affording you access. And so that's a form of decentralized identity that I think we'll move into. So identity just to access, let's say, websites or web services. And you might have like hundreds of these, as many as you might have passwords. So identity
that's the allure here with Web3, right? Is like you have different wallets for different things, and you're going to be in control of how much information you're giving someone for this activity versus another activity where I might want to give you more of my personal information. So yeah, I love that part of it, where it really gives people a lot more control over how much am I showing to the world here while I'm going online.
Yeah.
Nick, man, this has been fascinating. I love talking about this like high level, really interesting identity stuff. So thank you so much for all your time and telling me your story. Let everybody know how they can learn more about Dock Labs and how they can follow you and get in touch if they wanted to.
Of course, yeah. So if you go to dock.io, that's our main site, and then you can basically try it. We have, Matt, a no-code solution, so anyone can go there, like non-engineers, and you can just start a free trial. It doesn't cost anything at all. The name free would suggest that. And you go to certs.dock.io. And so you can go there, you can create a profile, and you can start to issue credentials. And you can also download our wallet, again, free of charge, and you can start to receive those credentials within those wallets. So the main website, dock.io, and certs.dock.io is probably a great place to start. And this technology is intended to be for everyone. It's not just for technical people and for geeks. That's the way we'll get mass adoption, is making it highly usable. So those would be two good places to start.
Yeah, that's great. We're trying to push the same story here at Decential, not for geeks, it's for everybody. And we're just going to bring you the stories of the people that are making this stuff, like you, Nick. So thank you again so much. It was really a pleasure, and I really enjoyed talking to you.
Oh, likewise, Matt. Thanks again for having me on, and appreciate all the work you're doing for the community.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for joining us, and don't forget to rate and follow this show on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon Music. Decent People is a production of Decential Media. It is produced by Matt Bogart, with music by Brian Duncan and Kareem Imes.